Story goes of a young man who worked in his father's publishing company. Now, his dad was quite wealthy. He owned the publishing company, he'd always owned it outright, hadn't sold any of the company to anyone else. And so this boy grew up with everything. He had an Xbox 360, he had a generous allowance, he had a good job once he graduated college. But he wasn't happy, he wasn't contented. He'd always wanted to be a writer, and he tried. He tried to write, but he couldn't seem to produce something really worth publishing, despite his father's encouragement and efforts to help him. And so one day, he went to his father's office and he told his father that he wanted his inheritance early. He said he needed to travel, he needed to be free, he needed to be able to follow up ideas as they came to him and not be dependent on anyone. And of course, his father, being a good father, tried to talk him out of it. He he told him that he could travel some, he would pay for him to travel some, but that if he continued traveling, of course, he'd have to lose his job at the publishing company, and he might need to look for some other sort of job that would allow him to travel more. And he tried to figure out a way to come to some sort of a compromise. But the young son was having none of it. He yelled at his father, he accused him of not supporting his dream, and he said he needed to be truly free in order to really give his artistic talent justice. So with a heavy heart, over the next month, the father made the arrangements. He had an older son and a younger daughter. So he didn't sell the entire company, of course, but he sold off a large portion of the ownership of the company, and he gave it to his son, and he sent him off with his blessing. And for the next month, that son had the time of his life. He went to the Caribbean, he saw the Foz do Iguaçu in southern Brazil, he visited New Zealand, went to southern France, backpacked a little bit in Italy. It was beautiful. And he ended up in Spain in a very, very posh hotel. And at first, during his travels, he had started a travel blog, and he tried to keep up with his writing. But he discovered that it was more fun to do whatever he felt like, to worry most about where were the best restaurants, where were the nicest hotels, where were the prettiest girls that he could find. And so quickly his writing had fallen by the way, and he was just traveling. And in that beautiful hotel in southern Spain, he met the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen in his life. And he bought her meal, of course, and she flirted with him, and he asked her back up to his room for the night. And she said that she'd come, but it was going to cost him. She said that he would have to pay $10,000 and that he could have her for the night, and she would do anything he wanted. Now, the young man had never seen anyone more beautiful than this girl, so he paid. And quickly he realized that he didn't want to leave southern Spain. And every night he was with this girl, or with one of her friends that she introduced him to, and he started throwing late night parties in his hotel room, which was a suite of rooms, really. And he went through expensive bottles of wine and even smoked a little pot, though he'd seen too much drug television to try anything harder than pot. And this continued for months, and he was living it up and loving every minute of it until his debit card bounced. It was denied at a fancy restaurant. So he thought, of course, it was some mistake. So he went on to his bank account and realized it was empty. And he still owed some people money, like the hotel. He was able to sell his fancy sports car and get out from under his debts, but he was left with nothing. So he asked that first girl to help him, and she found him a job as a garbage boy in a low-end restaurant that her cousin worked at. And then he discovered what it was like, really, being somewhere without friends, family, or money. And he was renting a tiny two-room apartment that the electricity only sometimes worked in. And he was trying to make ends meet, pay for his meals, which could no longer be the fancy meals that he was used to. And he didn't see a way out. And one day he found himself, as he was taking out the garbage, going through and eating some of the French bread that had been thrown away. And that's when he really realized that he was at a low point. But he thought it to himself, I used to have everything I needed when I worked for my dad, when I didn't have all this money. I need to go back. I need to ask him for a job again. I know I don't deserve for him to even look at me, but maybe he'll let me have my old job. So he became even more intent upon saving, and he scrimped and he saved, and he was able to, with the help of the kitchen trash, to survive long enough to buy a boat ticket back to America. And he got there and he hitchhiked back to North Dakota and to his dad's house. And he went walking up the drive one late afternoon, and he saw his dad sitting on the porch. And he'd already prepared what he was going to say. But as he was walking up, he saw his dad suddenly stand to his feet and look, kind of peering at him. And then his father started to run towards him. And before he could even get a word out, his father nearly tackled him. He hugged him so hard. And then he was yelling for the rest of the family to come out of the house. And the mom and the sister came out. And he said, look, it's John, he's back. And John said, Dad, I know I don't deserve this, but can I have my old job back? And he couldn't even tell if his dad was listening, because his dad was yelling to his mom and sister to order food from that fancy Italian restaurant that he liked so much. And he was telling them to call up the neighbors, call up the family friends, that they were going to have a party that night. And they were going to celebrate because he was back. And he found himself washed, cleaned up, shaved, in an old suit of clothes that he'd owned before, sitting amongst smiling family and friends. And he almost couldn't remember the life that he'd come from.